Hi everyone, good to see you all again. After a deep technical talk this week by Professor Farima on this Tuesday, we have another practical webinar on automotive security today. Before we start, let me make two short introduction and announcements. We have our upcoming hardwear.io online trainings scheduled in the month of April. Uh, we hope to do it physically based on the regulations by the German government. We would try, if not, but we would mostly, I think it would happen online itself. Uh, Also, we have started a new channel on job openings. So if any of you have or your companies have requirements on hardware security and are scouting for talent, please let us know and we would be happy to share it within the hardware community on our Discord. So today we have Rafael, who is a principal trainer and security specialist at Riscure. He will address topics on security in automotive, embedded systems, and typical pitfalls and risky assumptions that happen when designing, implementing, and testing new components. Some house rules for the day. The webinar is for 30 minutes and we would keep 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please send them across via the Zoom chat. I will be moderating them and one by one, we will take them. Please don't forget to also share your feedback with us after the webinar. It just helps us to improve and motivates the team to continue organizing such webinars for you all. Without any further delay, Rafael, I will let you take the webinar and share your presentation with us.
Okay, thank you, Andrix. Let me try to share my screen. Yeah, okay. So, well, welcome everybody, and thanks again for this opportunity to talk in this hardwear.io conference. So the topic for today is about automotive product security, or the same old story but on wheels. And maybe a bit of background about me and Riscure. So I am, as Andres mentioned, a principal trainer security specialist at Riscure, and I work there since 2013, so a bit of time now. My interest is in embedded system security. So what I do usually is training courses or some projects or customized projects which are related to advanced attacks like site analysis, fault injection, combined attacks, but also things in automotive systems or secure bootloaders. So at Riscure, we work mainly with embedded security, mobile security, well, a lot of things. And we do at Riscure not only services, but we also manufacture tools. And we also provide training and security consultancy in some aspects. And this involves automotive. That's what we're going to do today. But also we work with other things like secure elements, smart cars, secure boots, TE, hardware and crypto. So basically, if it has chips and security, most likely at Riscure we work with it. So this is more or less what I do. And today we're going to talk about this automotive security. We're going to look at what happens now. For this, I will first give a bit of background. We will talk about security, like this old story and what happens always. And then we will see the same, but on automotive. And once we discuss what's going on, then something I would like to discuss in this webinar is now what happens in the new regulation framework. A lot of things happened last year, and it's good to know. So it's interesting to know also what's going to happen in the next years. And can we do something to fix security, or is there something to be done? Let's start. So the first thing is about automotive security. So where are we now? For this, I would like to first tell a bit of a story, because I think it's interesting to remind of the old story of security in general in embedded systems. For this, maybe an example would be to look at this satellite TV, the piracy or the hack wars that happened. So first, there was 1997, you had, for example, these TV decoders, and they decoded the TV satellite image. They had a smart card, and then people started copying this device, the smart cards, the subscriber cards. So this happened that you had these copies of the cards, and then, of course, this was on fraud. So then the companies that made this media that was paid for subscription, then they started to send updates to the smart cards. And of course, hackers in this case are very creative. So if you send updates to the smart cards, what do? Well, we make programmable smart cards. So now we can have these codes and share it over the internet. Security is still compromised. So at a certain moment, then the checks on these boxes were quite good. And then these programmable cards wouldn't work anymore. So the system would actually detect, hey, you have a forged card. This is not legit. I'm going to block the system. But hackers would challenge this solution. And then it's like, okay, you block the system. You're in an infinite loop. The system is stuck. Let's make something it's called, for example, this one is Unlooper. It's a device that now does fault injection on the system. So you have now a hardened system, but don't worry, we still glitch it. So this was a fight that was going on for years until, I know, 2015, 2016. And then what I wanted to share this story about is because nowadays I would, for example, I'm a trainer at Riskier, so I would deliver a free week of training at Riskier if you can show me a hacked cable TV decoder that can decode today the cable signal from any of the European senders. Why I'm saying that is because the security on these things is so high that if you want to see pirate images from broadcast signals, you could typically just scan this image and stream it over internet, but you would not hack this device. The security of this thing after so many years has got to a level that is really, really something decent. And this little story is just to have a bit of hope. Things were broken, but that's now a good solution security-wise. But it's the same in a lot of different elements. So for example, for smart cards, maybe some of you might remember these MyFair cards that were attacked. That, well, nowadays, hacking a smart card is really, really tough. Or mobile phones, or smart meters, routers. Well, nowadays, security depends on the router. But so these devices, in the end, there is a trend, which is first, they are vulnerable to attacks. You make them, but they are not secure. Then you start with some logical exploits, software things. Then security starts improving about software. And then you start getting some physical attacks, some hardware attacks. Then you try to escalate remote. Then the most sophisticated attacks, they do not have any tamper evidence. So you have, in this case, these devices, you don't know that we're under attack. And now today's talk is about cars, automotive. So a car, maybe you are thinking of something like this picture, but if you look at a car from a computer's point of view, a car is actually like this. It's a really, really big network with a lot of ECUs. ECU stands for electronic control unit, and it's just an embedded computer. This is actually a picture of a BMW Series 7 from 2013. So it's already 8 years old. You can imagine how a modern system with autonomous driving and those things look. And so food for thought. So yeah, if now we have a network of computers and security was not a thing in automotive until recently, then what can go wrong if we now also connect this thing to the internet, to your phone, to the charging post, to other automotive stuff like this vehicle to vehicle or V2X technologies? So what happened is the same old story. And this, I think, is good to share if you're not familiar with it. The first moment that this got in the news big time, which was this attack in 2015, this Jeep hack known attack. So this was an article that was initially published in Wired magazine, but then it also went to Black Hat and DEFCON. And this was the first attack that was in mass media because it was remote attack. Then Charlie Miller and Chris Balasek, just over the internet, could target a car. And then they put a journalist driving in the highway. And then by clicking some button, they could even stop the car in the middle of the highway. As you can imagine, that's really a threat for the safety of the driver. So after that, then it was like Pandora's box open. So a lot of things happened. So you can see, for example, this Jeep Cherokee in 2015. Then also later in that year was the first conference of hardwear.io. But then you have another one was like this Nissan Leafs that the API was exposed over the internet, or the keyless fob hack, or you have also some activity or handbooks for hackers. Then you have more hacks and then more organized community like the Car Hacking Village, more publications, more stuff. Well, the list really goes on. And unfortunately, these days we are quite familiar with curves, but the curve on attacks, this is how it looks. So if we look at the attacks that are happening nowadays, last year it was more than 200 attacks on automotive alone. So yeah, what happened in the automotive industry? Well, the people in automotive, they were concerned up until 2015 mainly on safety. But this attack triggered now a massive reaction, not only for the companies, but also from governments. So in particular, after these attacks, there were already some activities in cybersecurity. But then what happened back in the day was that the automotive industry, these efforts started to accelerate. The standardization bodies, they started to introduce new standards. For example, this SAE J3061. Governments started to work on regulations. We need to do something about cybersecurity. And in this case, the UN, United Nations has a group, Working Party 29, which is dedicated to these automotive regulations. So a lot of things happened, like auto ISACs, then yeah, basically everybody started working. Now, what happens in 2021? Well, last year was a really big milestone in automotive security because a lot of things that started back in the day actually came into place. So in 2021, now what happens is the following. There is a standard, which is this ISO SAE 2144 standard. This standard sets a framework to put cybersecurity in the context of automotive development. If you make car components, which are with electronics, this is how you can make security into it. It's like a security development lifecycle, but for cars. You also have another standard, which is this SAE J3101. That standard is if you put a secure element, like a crypto thing, extra requirements. How do you actually do that? And even further, you have government regulations. The UN, this EC stands for Economic Forum for Europe, but this is a group in United Nations that says these are the rules to make a car. They have made in 2020 new regulations for cybersecurity and software updates. And since 2021, so actually last month, they have been enforced. Timeline, this means that last year, automotive got new regulations, new standards. Since this year, the regulations are available for countries to adopt them. And the moment that they are adopted, for example, in the European Union, this means July 2022, then this will become mandatory. And that means that if you're not doing cybersecurity as an automotive company, you cannot sell your thing in the market. So this in 2024, that is the moment that any new car, any new component, there is this transition period until that time. If you didn't do security until then it will not be allowed. So this means that now, today, then automotive security is mandatory. When companies are developing today automotive systems, they have to do security because otherwise they will not be able to sell when they finish the development. So this is the situation that we're now. For me now, what I would like to highlight in this webinar is what goes wrong, why automotive security has things which are not great yet, and what are the next steps. For these, usually in this webinar, I would expect that you guys have more of an attacker or a hacker mindset. And it's interesting to also put yourselves in the developer situation. So let me ask a very quick question. So imagine you have an automotive system, an ECU. How would you implement security in that thing? Think for 10 seconds about this question. It's the dramatic pause moment. But now, just for you to think, when I asked this question, did you think about who is the attacker, or what can the attacker do, or what are the assets you would protect in an automatic system? Or if you take an asset like, okay, a crypto key, where does this asset live? In one ECU, in many? Is it the same in all the ECUs? Is it shared? Also, we have a lot of ECUs. So are there many attack paths? Can I do a physical attack or over the internet? And even further, what does it actually mean to implement security? What is implementing security? And automotive has a long history of implementing safety, where you have to do also software without bugs and things. So is implementing safety the same thing as security? So these are challenges that, as you can imagine, implementing security is not that easy. But let's make it a bit more easy. Another trick question, just to put yourself in a bit more in the foot in the shoes of a developer. Imagine you have a very simple ECU, an engine control unit, okay, and you have a crypto key, very simple. So how would you implement security in such a simple system? Dramatic pause. So maybe with a very small system, you can architecture it. But now, if you think of it, if you have to really make it, is there any standard process to implement this? And during the development process, like you have the requirements, you develop it, you test it. So where does actually security fit? When do you put security? At testing only, are concepts? So how does it work? And if you have to get things from suppliers like hardware, chips, software, how about the security of these things? Do they use the same threat model? Did they think the same as you? Or even another thing which is very practical, but is very important. Who is going to pay for this? Because some people think security is free, but actually it's not free. So how much does it cost? Is it in euros, in time, in Dogecoins? So how do you pay for this? And even better, who pays for this? Because when you buy a car, you don't buy a car with, hey, it has AES 256 crypto. You buy a car because it has a very nice, I don't know, engine or all the things. So in this case, in automotive, what happens is that beginning with security is not easy. This is something that started to happen relatively recent. And attackers know this. So automotive security was not a priority until very recent. And it is mandatory since last year when regulations really started to become a reality. So that means that as an attacker, an ECU, an electronic control unit, is an easy target. And you have to keep it in mind that what you buy nowadays, the typical full development cycle of an automotive thing, it's 3 to 5 years long. So the technology that you would find nowadays in a car is something that was developed or started to be developed between 3 to 5 years ago. Also, another thing that happened in automotive is when the big attacks happened, this was like, hey, remote attack. We go over the internet and then we stop the car, or we go over the internet and then we open the windows. But then it's important to realize that these attacks, almost all of them, require reverse engineering of the ECUs, and they were very complicated. So then the industry started like, oh, we need to start stopping this. How does it come, the attack from? It comes from the internet. There was a lot of focus on the backend network security. But in a car, you have to understand that the car is something you own as a user. I can go to a car workshop and I always have physical access to the ECU. I can just tear apart my car. And another thing that happened and was learned later the hard way is that there were lots of effort for the first attack, but this attack scaled very well. For example, this Jeep hack, this took 2 really veteran security experts, and they took more than 1 year to do this attack. And then the reproducibility of the attack was just a click and break, but it took quite some effort. If you look at how feasible is this, how likely 2 experts for a year just trying to break this, well, maybe you say it's acceptable. The Tesla hacks that maybe you have seen videos over the internet, hey, I press a button, the Tesla pops the hood open. So this was a full team of 10 people, 9 months, and then you can do an attack. Okay, so if you look at it, it's like, yeah, who's going to spend that time and effort to do it? Well, in this case, this was an attack that it took forever to do it, but once you do it, it scales. Every car gets broken. So as a summary, why so many attacks in automotive? Is because automotive started very recently with security, and then they are starting with the common pitfalls of security, plus what I call the automotive bonus. There are some extra pitfalls that happen in automotive because it's an industry or a market that has some extra things. So we're going to go over some of these pitfalls, and this will give you a bit more context of what the situation is and what are the current struggles in automotive. Pitfall number 1, this is not related to automotive, this is just in general when an industry starts with security, or if yourself you're starting with security, it's just misunderstanding of security activities or language or requirements, etc. So if you have, for example, a team of developers and you have security engineers, then the developers on one hand, they want to make something great. So functionality great, performance the best, the safest thing possible in automotive. But then you put security engineers and they want to provide security. So in this case, both teams actually have common goals. So both of them, they want to have a time to market very fast, the sooner the best to the market, to be within budget. So we have some budget of time, let's spend it wisely. But what often happens is when you start, there is no common language. So basically the developers, they want to make things, and the security engineers, it looks like they want to break things. Actually, it's really not the case. So both of them want to make a great product, and they will have a different language. But in the end, they all want to make something nice. The ugly truth is that if there is no agreement, if both teams do not understand each other and align on what they mean, then security usually ends up broken because bad decisions are taken. Let me give an example. Okay, so this is a typical example about security requirements, and this illustrates situations that we see often when companies start with security. So you have, for example, here several requirements, like the module must use AES-256 crypto. The module must have a hardware security module with AES-256 hardware crypto engine. The firmware of this module should be encrypted, and the module must lock after 10 failed authentication attempts. Okay, so this, for example, we have an automotive course where we discuss these kind of things. So when you take these requirements in isolations, questions pop up, and this is where you need to align. Because should this solution use this hardware security module for the AES crypto, or can you implement it in software? It says you must use AES crypto, but it doesn't say you must use the one from the hardware security module. Or should the firmware be encrypted with AES or not? And what does it mean to lock the product? How do you lock a hardware element? And also, what is to fail authentication? So how can an authentication fail? When you have these questions, if not everybody aligns in this meaning of the questions, usually you end up with something broken. And as an attacker, this is what you exploit, these interface collisions, this kind of mismatches. So this is something that is, automotive is a really big industry, many parties, and this is something that will get better, but it's a struggle now. Another of the challenges, another of the typical pitfalls that also happen when starting with security. So ignoring that hardware attack scale. So one of the things that happen in automotive often when you do security is to start with something called TARA. It's a threat analysis and risk assessment. And basically this is an activity where you would look at possible attacks, you would rate them, and then you would estimate how much of a risk they are to your system. And in here, what they want to achieve, the automotive companies, is to have practical security. So not make something perfect, but make something that the residual risk, the chance of something breaking your system, is an acceptable risk. It's maybe too difficult or too expensive. And often it is forgotten that practical security is a function of investment and profit. So on the one hand, you would have the investment of the attacker. So what is the cost? Like tools, knowledge, availability, requirements of knowledge. Do I need a PhD on a certain topic to be able to do an attack, or do I just Google stuff? Time, do I need to spend a year or not? So usually an attacker would desist if the investment is much bigger than the profit. If I need to spend €1,000,000 to hack my car, and my car is €10,000, why would I do that? It's a bit not great, right? But this scalability also changes the balance, because it might be that I get, for example, after spending €1,000,000 on my car, I get hacked. But this hack turns out to not work only on my car, it works on all the cars of my same model. So if I can scale an attack, and this often happens in hardware attacks, then the profit scales, and suddenly this super expensive attack makes sense. An example, you might have an attack which requires a lot of hardware, and it's fully physical, like hacking the odometer of the car. This is a study from 2018 in Europe. And just for you to know, this attack that requires physical access, and it's with a special tooling. In Europe, tuning the mileage to sell your car secondhand, its cost estimated at least 1.31 billion euros, and probably fraud scenario of 8.77 billion. So it's a bit of money. What do you think? And this is only about the odometer. With the new regulations, there are more things like personal identifier information, like your name or your phone number. Or what about unlocking optional features or downgrading the software? So as you can see, a lot of things that can happen. Another one, pitfall number 3, about secure coding. This one is not automotive exclusive, but this is something that happens when you start with security. Here you have a code example, and this is a code example which does as follows. We have 3 variables, 3 integer numbers, and we get random numbers. Okay, this is the random function. If you decide to run this code, then what happens is what you can see in the picture. Are these random numbers random? Not really, right? In this case, the problem is rand. Even if you see this function, this is not a cryptographically secure random number generator. This is a pseudo random number generator and not that great at that. So if you want to implement security, you need to be actually trained on what security coding means. And this is not only the one that writes the code, this needs to be the whole development cycle, because maybe the cryptographer puts the requirements and then the developer needs to implement these requirements, but both of them need to understand security. So this means that we need to train everybody, because the code analysis tools that we have nowadays, they are not the silver bullet. The coding standards in automotive, they are for safety. Some of them are for security, but still not a silver bullet. There is a lot of testing in automotive. You will not catch 100% of the issues. You have code certified for safety, not necessarily secure. So basically, if you do not have training of all the whole development chain, also the testing chain, this is the recipe for disaster. And this is something that takes time. Now, automotive companies are spending quite some effort in training, but it will still take a bit of time. Then let's go to the last things about automotive things, the bonus pitfalls. Automotive is always special, like this car. What is special there? There is something that happens in automotive, which is this thought that a car is just another computer. And it's important to remember that attackers have physical access to the ECUs, because I can buy a car, I can rent a car. So then what happened back in the day was, hey, we need to do something about security. And computer IT security often considers that physical access is game over. So I have access to a computer, I can hack it. And if this physical access is considered into the security of the solution, then you would also engineer it. Like I would use secure boot, trusted execution environment, secure elements, crypto, etc. Okay, so we have solutions for this. But then in automotive security, what happened is, okay, let's put the IT security, this thing, we know it works. My phones are quite secure nowadays. Let's do the same. But an ECU, what the hardware is, doesn't have the features of a modern computer. So is there secure boot? Well, many systems do not have this. Or trusted execution environments or secure elements. Well, many of these things, they are not there. And the systems that start getting these things, implementing secure boot properly or trusted execution environments or having updates, this is very difficult. I mean, at Riskier, we do a lot of these evaluations. This is very hard to get it right. You might have heard in a hardwear.io, for example, the guys from Realize, Nick and Cristoforo, they have been working on this for a long time. They can tell you if you want a second opinion, this is not easy to do. So a car is not just another computer, it's a special thing. And this also costs money, so who pays for this? It's important to realize that this is a special thing for automotive. Second thing about automotive is the legacy for safety. So there is a very big history of automotive development for electronics needs safety. And you might have then colliding requirements with security. For example, you have a password. And then this password, for safety reasons, you can say, well, the password function should work as intended, should not crash the system if I have something weird. And security requirements would say something like the password should be unpredictable, the data that you protect with this password should not be available to unauthorized users. Summarizing this means that, for example, safety-wise, we can have a hard-coded and predictable password. And security-wise, a hard-coded predictable password is utterly unacceptable. Now, conflicting requirements. What happens, or what used to happen until very recent? In case of doubt, what happens is that safety still wins, because safety is the thing that stops the procedure. It's what pushes the red button in the factory. No safety, no car. So it's important to now realize that, okay, then we decide for hard-coded password. But then if you say hard-coded password, what if, for example, this password was the diagnostics password for an engine module? and I can reprogram this module with rogue code. So I can, for example, replay the password after sniffing it. Then I can just compromise the ECU. For example, I can modify my car to inject more gas, and then my 150 horsepower become 250. Then the ECU works as it shouldn't. I can drive much faster. The brakes are not prepared for that. Then, yeah, my car becomes not safe. So, yeah, luckily this thing it's gonna change soon because the UN regulations will change this. This is not going to be allowed. But another of the things that happen. Then the bonus pitfall number 3 for automotive is the assumptions regarding safety and security. It's very important to realize that safety and security are not the same. And in particular, a perfect correct implementation regarding safety can still be insecure. What does it mean? This is reflected in a risky assumption that sometimes we hear, which is the following one. If the safety goal, if the thing I want to do is the same as a security goal, then the same process should apply to both. An example, you have some chips which are meant for safety critical things, like the brake control unit. That thing should have a chip that should not crash, that should be withstanding a lot of things. Even the most extreme case, like ACLD, this is the highest level for safety, then that one requires that the chips, for example, are resistant against fault injection, and they are tested against fault injection. So I have a chip, and we have it tested against fault injection. This is the same like glitching for security, right? Well, then at Riskier, we took a couple of these chips, and then a couple of my colleagues, Niels and Ramiro, challenged this. And they found out that, well, if you start glitching, but now as a security approach, not as a safety approach, so if you try to break it, then you can actually glitch these chips. So this is just because safety just checks for random things. The attacker is mother nature. But security tries to break stuff. In this case, they just tuned a voltage glitch and they glitched the chips which were tested. So this is just to highlight that safety is not the same as security, and safety does not imply security by default. So if you have these assumptions, you have to know and validate your assumptions. Otherwise, you might end up shooting yourself in the foot. So as a recap, how do attackers see an automotive system? If you're going to now try as an attacker to go to a system like that, it's just another embedded system with some specific features. For example, it's going to run some proprietary software on top of some OS. So it will be a real-time operating system, or AutoSAR classic platform for a simple ECU, or some full operating system, a Linux-like thing, or AutoSAR adaptive for complex ECUs, like your infotainment, or maybe your self-driving thing, with extremely limited hardware, because cost is a very big thing in automotive, with standardized interfaces, with networking, without the full mitigation set that is usually deployed in IT systems. And this is going to be systems that you can buy nowadays, developed by engineers, which didn't have strong focus on security as it is nowadays, as it is today. Okay, keep in mind what you're buying today is something that was developed or started to be developed 3 to 5 years ago. So yeah, as a summary of this, the standard approach for attacking a car, or how an attacker would load to a car, is the same as all embedded systems. First, you get the firmware, you understand the targets, then you find vulnerability, and then you exploit the vulnerability. So it's the same old story, but now with wheels. And because many of you maybe have a car, a bit of hope. In 3 to 5 years, something that you should also be aware is that the automotive industry is not sitting still. So they are really changing this. And we will see the effects of mandatory security in 2021. It's a process. It took also time for other industries, but we will get there. The last thing I wanted to mention is, okay, let's say that we are 3 to 5 years in the future. Imagine that software security in automotive gets to the same level as a mobile phone nowadays. Mobile phone nowadays, if you want to hack it, it is still possible, but that's like the Champions League. It's really hard to do that. So will attackers give up? Let's talk a bit about that. Okay, let's talk about automotive attacks in a more mature security process. So imagine the following scenario. I buy a car that just entered start of production. Okay, so this is the latest model. Best cybersecurity practices were used. We don't have software bugs. We don't have hardware bugs. Great. Will I be able to hack it? Will I be able to find something out of it, like the manufacturer keys, software intellectual property, modify the options? get free navigation, but I didn't pay for it. So a car is a special thing. And as a special thing, this means that it has some special requirements. For example, it needs to be serviced by third-party workshops. In Europe and in many places in the world, you need to be allowed to go to a third-party workshop and they need to be able to test it. Or I need to go to a yearly check. For these, cars would have things like, for example, diagnostic services. This is an ISO standard, and your car, if it's not older than 20 years, will have it. And this, if you look at what these services have, this is like the free attacker, the best attack primitives you can have. We have arbitrary read and arbitrary write. You have functions in the diagnostic thing that you have read memory by address, request upload and download of data. So yeah, of course, automotive developers are not stupid. They don't allow this by default. You have some security access functions. Okay, so the newest update from 2020, you can have a new service which has even possibility of public key crypto. Fine. I said no bugs. So I apply secure coding practices. I use proper seeds, proper key. I have a try limit. You need keys per device to random numbers or cryptographically secure, not broken crypto. I prevent users to reverse engineer the tooling in the car workshop. Is this enough? Well, at Riskier, one of the things that we are known for usually is for site analysis and fault injections. And these kind of attacks can break this bug-free code. For example, here you have the algorithm that is used for a security access for authenticating an ECU. And if you start doing site analysis to the key calculation, you can get the key. The security on these things is not the same as you would have in a hardened smart card or a hardened mobile phone. Or the key verification. I send the password. It has to decide if it's okay or not. I do fault injection and maybe I can glitch it. So if you want to see more of these things, here we have a link. You can see it in the Riskier website. Also in hardwear.io, you have some of the webinars were about this. So lots of information. And seeing is believing. I do not have a lot of time. I'm going a bit more than the 30 minutes. But if you want to look at this, then, for example, you can look at that video. And there we were just glitching an automotive instrument panel dashboard. And then you can see that this is not a myth. This is what will happen next after security gets better. It's just a cat and mouse game. It takes some time to do this. Now, if you are a developer, what can we do? So is there anything that we can do now? Well, the first thing is just to acknowledge, and this is something that is happening progressively in automotive, that security is broader than safety. Okay, so you have to combine these efforts from safety to now expand this to security because it's a bigger field. You have to be aware that it's not the same. This will take time, but it will get better. Something that is important is to get also help and support from experts because starting is very, very hard, especially if you have not done this before. So follow training courses from experts. Beware of silver bullets, of solutions that say, hey, this is your solution for everything. Well, security is not something that happens overnight. It's hard. And it's also important to realize that learning how to break something, it's not the same as learning why something breaks. As a developer, you need to understand why something breaks, not only how to break it. It's easier to break than to make. And in particular, in automotive, something that needs to happen, and it's starting to happen, is to have a holistic approach, to not think as the classical pen testing approach, but also to think about scalability, about physical attacks, to have a sound threat model. And if you consider attacks, just go beyond just the requirements, just the checkboxes. So automotive is all about the details, about the corner cases. And in this case, these systems are in the field for 10 years. So for example, site analysis and fault injection, nowadays not mandatory. I can already tell you that this is what's going to happen in 5 years. Still, we will be able to do some attacks there because it's not required yet. Okay, so this is just, it will evolve. The last thing, it's important to adopt secure development life cycle. So if you have cybersecurity, doesn't matter how secure your system is if you put your code in GitHub with all the public keys. So you need to train developers, suppliers, having good cybersecurity practices, and maybe validating that what you made makes sense. Finally, here you have some links. So if you want to check some of the publications or things that I mentioned, so that's for you. And this is the end of my presentation. So now I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Rafael. I believe what you're trying to say is stop using cars and go back to using bicycles. All right.
Uh,
Let me
I
read the
would
questions for
say,
you.
yeah, I use a bicycle, but I also have a car. Yeah, it will get
Uh,
better.
uh, do the new security regulations for cars require the users to have the option to turn off the internet connection to the cars?
It's a very good question. So, to my knowledge, I am not sure if that is required. To my knowledge, it is not, but this is something I would need to check. So something that
Mhm.
is important to be aware is that modern cars very likely will have at least one data connection, because there are some systems. For example, there is a system called eCall, emergency call. This is an ECU that if you crash a car, it will send back to a backend, to an emergency system. The car crashed, is it upside down or not the car, are the doors open, and maybe even has a microphone to record so that you can talk to the backend, hey, I need help. So this means that now you will have a ECU, your car, which is telematically connected to a backend. Can you disconnect that? Well, in some cases, maybe you can, maybe you cannot. I do not recall from regulations this, but this is something that I would need to look in particular in these regulations I mentioned. I do not recall such a requirement that you can turn off the internet plug.
All right. There's a question from Roman. Is ROP exploitation a thing with ECUs? If so, isn't it feasible to roll out diversified ECU firmware such that ROP-based attacks are no longer at scale?
So is it possible to do ROP attacks? So yes, so ROP stands for return-oriented programming, and it's a technique which basically what it does is uses the software of the platform against itself. It's like you take the software of the platform, then you try to make it into little chunks, and then you try to combine this with an attack to use the software against itself. So the thing to look or to keep in mind is that technically, yes, it is possible to diversify the firmware. However, it's a mass production process. So is it feasible in a mass production process? Yes or no? This has an impact. It has an implication. So depending on how much it impacts the process, for example, can I make sure that now diversifying the firmware, all of them are equally safe? Is this going to pass certification process? There will be some challenges. Technically, it is possible, but this makes it harder to manufacture a thing. So drop attacks, yes. Would it be required? I honestly don't know, because maybe you can just find an attack that doesn't require ROP. Maybe you can just disable the signature checking in an ECU and then you can run your own code. So if it's required, yes. But will it require diversified firmware? Technically, it's possible, but think of always the mass production aspect and the safety aspect and the testability aspect. I would say it poses quite a challenge to do that.
All right. There's another question. Uh, what is secure element and TEE? I believe he just wants
Yeah.
the full form, that is trusted execution
So
environment. Right?
secure element is, yeah, you can think of it like a smart card, like your banking card. It is a very simple microcontroller or chip, which is usually tasked with very security sensitive or security critical functions. In a car, you might think of it as an element that, for example, is in charge of authenticating or being the root of security, for example, to authenticate the components. If you plug an engine control unit, is this a valid one, or is this a tuned one, or is it a fake one? So this is something that can be integrated into ECUs, and it's like a smart card, but it's an integratable one. You can also integrate it within chips. That's also possible. The software version or the software flavor of this is trusted execution environment, and this is not actually correct. TEE stands for trusted execution environment. This is a software/hardware contraption, which means the following. If you have hardware or a solution with TEE support, what it means is that your hardware, like your CPU and your memory, supports defining a partition of it that is only visible for a secure domain. If you think of your phone, a modern phone nowadays, when it boots a TEE partition. So it says this segment of memory is only available for the security part. And it also will bootstrap a trust execution environment OS. It's a very small operating system. This operating system usually is reviewed very intensively, like there is no bug or as little bug as possible. And this very simple OS, it's in task of very critical things, like, for example, generating payment keys or decrypting protected video content. So this means that if your phone, for example, runs Android or iOS and gets hacked, this trusted part is invisible to the Android or iOS. You cannot hack that. The normal software does not even see that. When you want to pay, how iOS or Android works would be, hey, TE part, pay. And then magically after a bit, you say, hey, payment happened. You don't know what happened, but payment happened. So this is a TE OS. In automotive, this will be more and more popular because cars are getting more and more features. Like you can maybe go to a gas station and pay with your car. Or you go, you have an electric car and you have to pay in the charging post. You have to say, hey, I'm a subscriber, blah. So this is something that will happen. Requires hardware support, requires software support. It's hard to configure. It will take time until it gets done. It's done right.
All right. I think we have few more questions, but in keeping time in mind, Rafael, I'll send you these questions after the webinar, and then you can send them across in terms of answers, and we'll post it on the YouTube channel. There's one question. Can you go back to your previous slides? Adam, the webinar is recorded and we'll be uploading it on the YouTube channel anyways. So you will have the entire presentation. You can watch it on the YouTube channel later on. Thank you, Rafael, for this wonderful presentation, and we hope to have you again in the future. And for all, please join our upcoming webinar, which is on the 2nd of March. That's Tuesday, on practical hardware attacks on deep learning. Until then, thank you so much. Please do send us feedback. I'll be pasting the link in the Zoom chat as well. And if you like the presentation, please give a shout out on social media to Rafael from Riscure and the hardwear.io team as well. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.